All right, everybody, welcome back to another deep dive.
Yes.
Today, we are tackling a question that has really perplexed people for centuries.
Yeah, for sure.
Can machines think?
It's such a fascinating question.
Yeah, and lucky for us, we've got a fantastic paper as a foundation for today's deep dive.
I know it's a good one.
It was written in 1950 by none other than Alan Turing.
Wow, 1950, that's wild.
I know.
And you know this guy, he's basically the father of the modern computer.
He really is. And what's amazing is this paper still feels so relevant today, even though it was written
Over 75 years ago.
I know, like you think it would be gathering dust in some archive, but the ideas are so fresh.
Definitely ahead of his time, that's for sure.
And what I love about this paper is that Turing doesn't just give us a yes or no answer.
Oh, no.
He gives us a thought experiment, a way to really explore this question.
I love it when they do that.
And that thought experiment is called the imitation game.
Oh, right. The imitation game.
Yeah. Have you heard of it?
Yes, I have, actually.
Good.
It's pretty famous in the AI world.
It is. So picture this. You're kind of like a detective in a room with a keyboard and a screen.
Okay.
You're talking to two different entities, but you have no idea who or what they are.
All right. Sounds like a mystery.
Yeah, one is human, one is a machine.
So you're trying to figure out who's the machine?
Exactly. Your job is to figure out which is which just by the way they answer your questions.
So it's like a blind taste test for intelligence.
That's a great way to put it. It's all about analyzing their language, their style, their wit, to see if you can spot any telltale signs of a machine.
Right, because you can't see them. So
Exactly.
you have to rely on their words alone.
Precisely. And that's the genius of Turing's approach. He sidesteps this whole philosophical mess of trying to define what thinking even is.
I could imagine those debates getting pretty intense.
Oh, I bet. And instead he focuses on something we can actually observe: behavior and communication.
Ah, so it's more practical.
Yeah, it's like saying, forget arguing about what's going on inside their heads.
Right.
Let's just see if they can walk and talk like a human.
It's about judging by their actions, essentially.
Exactly. So in this game, the machine's goal is to essentially pass as human right.
That's right. It has to convince you that it's a real person.
So it has to be engaging, convincing, maybe even a little deceptive, just like a real person might be in a conversation.
Right. It's not just about giving the right answer.
No.
It's about sounding human.
Exactly.
It's about fitting in.
Okay, so let's actually play this out.
Okay, I'm game.
Let's say I'm the detective and you're the machine.
Right.
I'm going to ask you a tough question and you have to try to convince me you're human.
Oh, boy. This is going to be hard.
All right. Let's see. How about this? What's your take on Shakespeare's use of iambic pentameter in Hamlet?
Well, first of all, I would probably stall for a bit,
Yeah.
Maybe type a few hms and wells just to simulate, someone thinking hard.
Oh, it's good. Yeah.
Then I might admit that while I've read Hamlet, the intricacies of iambic pentameter aren't exactly my forte.
It's sneaky. I see what you're doing there.
Maybe even subtly try to steer the conversation towards a topic I'm more comfortable with, like,
Like what?
I don't know, the play's themes of betrayal and revenge. Something a bit more, humanly relatable.
Brilliant. That's exactly what a clever machine would do, steering the conversation towards something a little more emotional.
Well, that's the thing. The machine doesn't even necessarily have to get the answer right.
Right.
It just has to sound believable.
That's right. And that's what makes the imitation game such a powerful tool for exploring this whole question of, can machines think?
Exactly. It's not a perfect test,
Yeah.
but it gets us thinking in the right direction.
So did Turing actually believe machines could pull this off?
He did. He was incredibly optimistic.
Really?
Even back in 1950, he believed that within a few decades, machines would be able to play the imitation game so well they'd fool human interrogators a good chunk of the time.
That's a bold prediction, especially considering the state of technology back then. I mean, computers were massive.
Oh yeah, they were these huge room-filling machines.
It's incredible that he had that kind of foresight.
I mean, it's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
I bet he got a lot of pushback.
Oh, he did. People came at him from all angles with all sorts of objections.
Although, what were some of the juiciest counter-arguments?
Well, there was the theological objection.
Oh, the theological objection.
Yeah. The argument that machines being creations of man simply couldn't think, because thinking is a divine gift reserved for beings with souls.
Ah, the classic machines don't have souls argument.
Exactly.
What was Turing's comeback to that?
Well, he basically flipped it right back on them.
Yeah.
He said that to say God couldn't give a soul to a machine was to limit God's power.
Interesting.
Like, who are we to say what God can and can't do with silicon and circuits.
Okay, that's a good one. What other objections did he have to deal with?
Well, there was the heads in the sand objection, which is basically just pure fear disguised as an argument.
Oh, heads in the sand.
Yeah, people were afraid of the implications of machines thinking.
Yep.
So they just wanted to ignore it and pretend it couldn't happen.
Yeah, that's relatable. I mean, when any new technology comes along, there's often that initial fear of the unknown.
Of course, it's natural to be cautious.
But Turing wasn't having any of it. He argued that giving in to fear was a dead end.
He was a man of science and reason.
Exactly. He believed we should face these possibilities head on, no matter how unsettling they might seem.
So brave.
Were there any objections that really dug into the core of what makes thinking thinking?
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
There were some really thought-provoking ones, like the consciousness argument.
Consciousness argument. Okay, tell me more.
So the idea is that even if a machine could perfectly mimic human responses, it wouldn't truly be thinking because it wouldn't be experiencing those thoughts and feelings the way a human does.
So it's like the machine is like a super realistic chatbot.
Yeah, like a really good one.
It can say all the right things at the right time, but it doesn't have that inner world of thoughts and emotions.
Exactly. It's missing that subjective experience.
So how did Turing respond to that?
Well, he had this really clever argument. He basically said that if a machine can demonstrate an understanding of concepts through conversation, even if it can't subjectively feel those concepts, wouldn't that still count as a form of thinking?
So it's like we can't prove the machine is feeling joy or sorrow, but if it can talk about those things in a way that shows real comprehension,
Right.
maybe that's enough.
Maybe that's all we need.
It's a really interesting point. Okay, so were there any other big names in the anti-machine thinking camp?
Oh, there was a famous one from Lady Lovelace. She argued that machines are inherently limited by their programming.
Okay, so Lady Lovelace.
Yeah, she said they can only do what we tell them to do. They can't come up with truly original ideas.
But wait, even with programming, things can get pretty unpredictable, right?
Oh, absolutely. And Turing acknowledged this. He pointed out that even with rigid instructions, the complex interactions of those instructions can lead to unexpected outcomes.
So it's like a recipe, you can follow it to the letter, but tiny variations in ingredients or cooking times can result in totally different dishes.
Exactly. It's the butterfly effect, but for code.
Love that analogy. So Turing couldn't just point to a machine in 1950 and say, see, it thinks. So how did he propose we actually settle this debate?
He believed the answer lay in observation and experimentation, watching how machines develop and learn over time. And he even introduced this radical concept of learning machines.
Oh, wow. Learning machines. That sounds like a whole other deep dive.
It is, and that's where things get really interesting, because Turing wasn't just talking about machines that follow instructions. He was talking about machines that could learn and evolve on their own.
Well, then I guess we'll have to save that for part 2 of this deep dive.
I think so.
Stay tuned, everybody. We'll be right back. Okay, so we left off with this idea of learning machines.
Right, like machines that can actually learn and evolve on their own.
It's pretty mind-blowing to think about it.
It is like, imagine a machine that can not only follow instructions, but could actually figure things out for itself.
Right, like a machine that could learn from its mistakes and get better over time.
Exactly. And to understand Turing's vision here, I think it helps to go back to that analogy he drew between learning machines and the development of a child's mind.
Okay, the child's mind analogy.
Yeah, so think about it. A child isn't born with like a fully formed understanding of the world, right?
No, they have to learn everything.
Exactly. They start with some basic instincts and abilities, but then through experience, interaction, feedback, their mind gradually develops and becomes more complex.
So you're saying Turing imagined machines that could go through a similar process.
That's right. Instead of trying to program like a fully fledged adult mind from scratch, which would be incredibly complex,
Yeah, I can imagine.
he thought it would be more effective to start with a child machine.
A child machine.
Yeah, something with basic learning capabilities that could then be nurtured and developed.
So it's kind of like giving the machine a set of building blocks and then letting it figure out how to use those blocks to build more and more complex structures.
That's a great way to put it. It's about creating a system that can learn and adapt on its own.
So how would that even work? I mean, how do you teach a machine to think like a child?
Well, Turing had some fascinating ideas about that. He even used this really cool analogy from nuclear physics, the idea of a subcritical versus a supercritical pile.
Okay, a supercritical machine that sounds intense.
It is, so imagine a subcritical pile of material, right?
Yeah.
It's not quite large enough to sustain a chain reaction.
Okay.
You introduce a neutron, and it causes a bit of activity, but it quickly fizzles out.
Okay, I'm with you.
Now think of that as like a mind, whether it's human or machine, that's not yet reached a critical mass of knowledge and understanding.
So it's like it has the potential to learn, but it hasn't quite reached that tipping point.
Exactly. Now, a supercritical pile, that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
That's one that's reached that critical mass. You introduce a neutron, and it triggers this huge cascade of reactions, releasing this enormous amount of energy.
Wow.
Turing believed that minds, too, could reach this supercritical state where learning becomes self-sustaining and leads to this like explosion of new ideas and connections.
So he was basically saying that once a machine reaches a certain level of complexity, it could take off on its own.
Exactly. It's like a chain reaction of learning.
That's pretty amazing, but it also kind of scares me a little bit.
I know, right? It's both exciting and a little terrifying.
Okay, so if we're talking about machines learning like children, what about things like punishment and reward?
Ah, yes, the classic carrot and stick approach.
I mean, aren't those pretty crucial to how humans learn right from wrong, good from bad?
Turing definitely considered this. He thought rewards and punishments could play a role, especially in the early stages of a machine's development.
So you're saying we could program machines to like feel good when they do something right and feel bad when they mess up?
In a sense, yes, but Turing also recognized that this approach has its limits. It's like trying to teach someone a complex concept using only yes or no questions.
Right, you can't really get into the nuances that way.
Exactly. So he believed we'd need something more sophisticated than just carrots and sticks to truly nurture a machine's intelligence.
So what did he propose?
Well, he thought we'd need richer, more unemotional forms of communication, like symbolic languages, to convey these complex ideas to machines.
Like a special kind of programming language.
Exactly. And this would allow them to learn far more efficiently than through simple trial and error.
So instead of just telling the machine good job or bad job, we'd actually be able to explain things to it.
Right. We'd be able to guide its learning in a more nuanced way.
Okay, that makes sense. But then the question becomes, what would these child machines actually look like?
Ah, that's the million-dollar question, right?
I mean, was Turing picturing little robot toddlers running around a lab?
Well, he didn't really get into specifics about the hardware. He was more focused on the programming side of things.
So it was more about the software than the physical form of the machine.
Exactly. He was interested in creating the right environment for learning to take place.
So like a digital nursery for baby AI?
Kind of, yeah. He imagined starting with relatively simple programs that could then be modified and expanded as the machine learned.
Okay, so it's not about creating a fully formed AI right out of the gate. It's about creating something that can grow and evolve.
Exactly. It's about giving the machine the tools it needs to learn and develop on its own.
That's pretty wild. But
Yeah.
even if we could figure out how to write these amazing self-learning programs, wouldn't we still need to teach these machines just like we teach children?
He definitely thought that education would be important, but he didn't imagine like a traditional school setting.
So no robot teachers and pop quizzes?
No, but he did believe we'd need to develop specific teaching methods tailored to the unique learning capabilities of machines.
So it wouldn't be about just replicating human education.
Right. It would be about creating an entirely new approach to learning designed specifically for artificial minds.
Okay, but now I have to ask the big question, the one that's been in the back of my mind this whole time.
Oh, yeah, well, that.
If we create these super intelligent learning machines, how do we make sure they don't, decide they're better off without us?
The classic fear of the machines taking over.
Yeah. It's a legitimate concern, right? I mean, it's straight out of science fiction.
It is. But Turing didn't think a dystopian future was inevitable.
Really?
He believed that the key to ensuring that machines use their intelligence for good lies in designing them with human values in mind from the very beginning.
So it's not just about making them smart, it's about making them ethical.
Exactly. We need to think carefully about the goals we program into machines, the types of decisions we allow them to make, and the ways we hold them accountable for their actions.
So it's almost like raising a child. You don't just teach them facts and figures, you instill in them a sense of right and wrong.
It's a great analogy, and it highlights the huge responsibility that comes with creating machines capable of learning and evolving.
It's definitely something we can't take lightly.
Absolutely. But remember, we're still in the early stages of this journey. A lot has changed since Turing's 1950 paper, but his ideas continue to shape how we think about the future of AI.
And that brings us to another mind-boggling question. If Turing were alive today, seeing the incredible progress in AI, what would he think? Would he be surprised or would he just say, I told you so?
That's a great question to ponder. But before we get too lost in hypotheticals, there's another fascinating aspect of Turing's vision we need to explore.
Oh, what's that?
Well, Turing argued that a key part of building intelligent machines was understanding how the human mind itself works. He saw this deep connection between the development of machines and the processes of learning and evolution in nature.
Wait, so he was suggesting that we could learn about human intelligence by studying how machines learn.
Exactly. He believed that studying machines could give us valuable insights into how our own minds work.
It's like a two-way street. We learn from machines, and machines learn from us.
And as our understanding of both grows, who knows what incredible breakthroughs might be possible.
That's what makes this whole field so exciting. It's not just about building smarter machines. It's about expanding our understanding of intelligence itself in all its forms. That's a perfect note to end this part of our deep dive on, but don't go anywhere, because in the next part, we're going to tackle some of the practical challenges and big questions that come with creating machines that can truly think. It's going to be a wild ride. Okay, so we've talked about learning machines and ethics and all these really big ideas,
Right, we've been all over the map.
but I want to bring it back to that fundamental question for a minute. The question that Turing was wrestling with back in 1950. Can we actually create machines that truly think like humans? Machines that learning, adapt, and maybe even surpass our own intelligence?
It's a question that never gets old, does it?
It really doesn't. And it's one that still sparks so much debate and fascination even today.
For good reason. I mean, it really gets to the heart of what it means to be human.
Totally. And it's not just a theoretical question anymore. With AI advancing so rapidly, it's starting to feel like a very real possibility.
Definitely, we're seeing machines do things that were once thought to be the exclusive domain of human intelligence.
Right, like writing poetry, composing music, even having conversations that are almost indistinguishable from human to human interactions.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you stop and think about it.
It really is, and it brings us back to those ethical considerations we were talking about earlier, because if we're creating machines that can potentially think and act on their own.
We have a responsibility to make sure they're aligned with our values.
Exactly, because as Turing pointed out, it's not just about making them smart, it's about making them ethical.
And that's a much harder challenge, isn't it?
It really is, because how do you even begin to program something as abstract as ethics into a machine?
Right. It's not like you can just write a line of code that says, be good.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
a much more nuanced and complex problem than that.
And I think Turing recognized this even back in 1950. He was laying out a framework for thinking about these issues, but he didn't have all the answers.
He was kind of a pioneer exploring this uncharted territory.
Exactly. And he was asking questions that we're still grappling with today.
So what were some of his key insights about how we might approach this challenge of creating ethical AI?
Well, he emphasized the importance of designing machines with human values in mind from the very beginning.
So it's about baking ethics into the very core of their being.
In a sense, yes. It's about thinking carefully about the goals we program into machines, the kinds of decisions we allow them to make, and the ways we hold them accountable for their actions.
It's like being a parent to a super intelligent child.
That's a great analogy, because you don't just teach your children right from wrong. You try to instill in them a sense of empathy, compassion, and responsibility.
And you hope that those values will guide their choices as they grow and mature.
Exactly. And it's the same with AI. We need to think about how to nurture those qualities in machines, how to help them develop a moral compass that aligns with our own.
It sounds like an incredibly daunting task.
It is. But I think it's also an incredibly exciting one because it forces us to really examine our own values and to think deeply about what kind of future we want to create with AI.
So in a way, this challenge of creating ethical AI is also an opportunity for us to reflect on our own humanity.
I think so, because ultimately the future of AI is intertwined with the future of humanity.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the world of Alan Turing and the enduring question of whether machines can think.
It's been a fascinating journey, hasn't it?
It really has. And I have to say, I'm walking away with more questions than answers.
That's always a good sign. It means we're really engaging with the ideas.
And that's what these deep dives are all about, right? Pushing the boundaries of our understanding and exploring the big questions that shape our world.
Exactly. So keep those questions coming. Keep exploring and keep diving deep.
And as always, stay curious.